morning, everybody, and thanks for joining us this Monday morning, the federal holiday day off for a lot of people, and those of us that are mostly retired, it's just like every other day. But we thought we would use this to kick off our occasional coverage of an actual storm event as part of the National Tropical Weather Conference live thing, and ELSA provides a good, interesting event to talk about. So we'll start up here with get my screen going again. Bingo. We'll start with the visible loop satellite over ELSA this morning as soon as it finishes loading here, which should be momentarily. Great, it's not going to do that. I hate that. Okay, I'm not going to mess with that one then. All right. Radar out of Cuba, Brian McNulty over at Erasmus at the University of Miami has been putting together these for years, and the Cuban radar has gotten better over the years. We see a long-range, long-time loop of the relatively disorganized system. Occasionally yesterday and last night it looked like an eye-like feature, but this morning it doesn't show that. Most of the convection is east of where the center has been fixed by aircraft and is analyzed. Nonetheless, you can see it's spreading a good bit of heavy rain into the high terrain over Cuba. So we'll be getting that. Jamaica got a lot of rain yesterday, and there may even be some pretty good rain as the Caymans will stay in the tail of the system when the storm starts moving straight north. Water vapor imagery this morning. A lot of things to point out here. Start with the storm itself. There's really cold tops in the convection that's ongoing, which is instead of being circular like yesterday, it's more elongated today, indicative of not quite as well organized a storm as we even had yesterday. And we had recon that I'll show later that points that out also. Also, there was considerable lightning both in the outer rain bands where you kind of expected and around the core thunderstorms here south of Cuba. Outflow looks pretty good off to the north, east through south right now, and somewhat restricted again as you get out west. There's a little pocket of dry air in this brown colored stuff emanating from extreme eastern Campeche across the Yucatan all the way into South Florida, and we'll talk about that when we look at some of the model data in a few minutes here. Elsewise, there's a ridge of high pressure, a cell of the ridge of high pressure extending into the southwest Atlantic, almost to the Bahamas. The frontal system that came down and brought dry air into most of the continental U.S. north of the Gulf Coast, in there where the westerlies are. And a piece of that is broken off, and there's a broad trough of low pressure now over much of the western and central Gulf of Mexico, which will play a role in the future course that our storm takes. Recon this morning, they had just finished a flight on the NOAA P3, and point out that they flew right over Cuba. That's one of the areas we work really hard at gaining cooperation on. It's beneficial to both countries for the safety of life and property to get the best data, and the flights can spend more time in the storm if they don't have to go around Cuba to get there. So whenever we have a storm like this, we're coordinating from the Hurricane Center with aviation and meteorological services in Cuba to get those clearances. Anyway, the flight was out there and found nothing in the discussion. It sounds like it got 1,006 millibars estimate for the central pressure. So again, it's on the very weekend of a tropical storm, and the winds show the same thing. No real strong winds were found near the center. The strongest winds were displaced again off to the east and northeast. And in that case, it looked like 45 to 50 and maybe as high as 55 knots if you want to be generous with it from the recon. So what's going to happen next? This was just to get a broad view of the forecast parameters from the model perspective. This was from the 6Z model run last night at the GFS. The ECMWF was quite similar, so I'll just show the one I got the most data for. It captures the storm south of Cuba. You see the the southwesterly flow over the eastern Gulf of Mexico on the front side of the trough, and the high pressure cell pinched off here just east of the Bahamas. And the area between the Bahamas and the trough is the steering channel that the storm is heading into already, and will continue until it makes a landfall. And we'll step through that. It takes the storm parallel the coast of the peninsula, western coast of the peninsula of Florida, and because it's parallel, landfall is problematic. Very small changes in where the center actually wobbles to can seriously impact where the actual landfall is. I would suggest anywhere from the model perspective, anywhere from near Tampa up to just south of Tallahassee would be a point of reference there. And it looks like a very clear-cut steering mechanism with the trough either stationary or moving even slightly west in the western Gulf, ridge building behind it, and the ridge pinched off to the east, steering the storm in that direction. After that, it gets captured in the westerlies, picks up speed, and accelerates off the mid-Atlantic coast by mid to late this week, and may actually re-intensify. We'll talk about that in a moment here. Take a quick look at the outflow mechanisms for the storm. Currently, they're talking about the southwesterly shear. It doesn't show it so much on this product, but there is a persistent southwesterly flow through a fairly deep level in the eastern Gulf. And while there's great outflow looking off to the north of the storm and out to the east, it eventually gets a lot of shear to the south and southwest as it moves up the west coast of Florida. So I'm thinking what you would see from this is a spreading out of the rain shield further north into the southeast U.S. as the storm approaches that area. But it's moving fast, so the threat of the very heavy rains seems minimal to me at this time. Quick look at the moisture. It's especially important in these developing storms to note whether it's got a lot of moisture in the mid-levels or whether dry air intrusions are affecting it. It's got a lot of dry air in its proximity, but the trajectories of that dry air are not taking it into the storm system itself, and the model continues that process of high moisture content in the mid-levels throughout the life cycle of the storm through landfall in Florida. And in fact, it doesn't start showing a dry air intrusion until it starts moving off the East Coast. So there's no inhibiting factor from moisture evident to me at this time. Sea temps, we're now getting into the warm part of the summer, and it's not as to be expected. Anywhere in the Gulf of Mexico is primed and ready to provide the source of energy for any tropical cyclone. So there's no inhibiting factor in that aspect. The track modeling guidance, if you recall, when the storm first started, there was a lot of variability, especially after about 48 to 72 hours. That is all gone now. Models are all very consistent in the northwest and north and northeast track around the Atlantic subtropical high, with very little variance in the various models that we look at. So there's high confidence now in the track forecast of the storm. Intensity actually has come around. There's a couple of outliers that don't know there's land up there and bring it up to a hurricane after 72 hours. But the more reliable guidance on this doesn't lose too much of the storm going over Cuba. That remains to be seen. That's always a difficult forecast to make. But maintain it as a tropical storm as it tracks northward in the Gulf, weakens it considerably at landfall, and then there's a lot of discrepancy as to whether it's going to re-intensify out in the day 4 and 5 period in the Atlantic, and we'll worry more about that when we get there. And I got to move something here. All right. The ensemble forecasts, again, the GFS and ECMWF were quite different early on in the storm with I think the GFS has been most consistent about the track tracks being in the Gulf rather than the Atlantic side, and several runs now they've been both in the same order there. Again, this adds to confidence. There are a few members that intensified in both models, but none severely. I don't think any of them brought it up to a hurricane when I looked at it. So there's more confidence that at this time in the intensity forecast than we've had throughout the event. Okay, on to the Ntwc forecast that just came out. Here is the track forecast on the large scale, showing somewhere between Tampa and south of Tallahassee, if it stays in the cone of being the landfall. And again, if it falls apart a little bit coming out of there, this might become problematic, as that's one of the tougher challenges of forecasting, is an ill-defined storm as to exactly where the center will go, because it might reform. And then showing it accelerating off the East Coast. Looking at the 3-day and the watches and warnings a little more closely. A lot of watches, and I think they dropped the hurricane warning now down in Cuba, since the storm has not intensified and it's on the coast now. So tropical storm warnings for a large chunk of western Cuba. And we've gone up with warnings now along the Florida coast for tropical storm conditions along the west coast of Florida, and in the lower middle Keys, a little watch area out to the upper Keys, and then east of or west of where the expected landfall is, we're in the tropical storm watch also. What else do I want to look at there? The next thing is, let's see, I want to look at the arrival times. There we go. And I want to look at 3 days, most likely, and the probabilities. There we go. This is a very useful graphic for me to quickly tell people what's happening as far as when they might expect it, and what the most likely, what the probability of getting those winds are. And what this shows me is that primarily along the west coast of the Gulf Coast of Florida is where the potential for tropical storm force winds are. It's on Cuba now, so it's ongoing, but the onset in the lower key in the Keys and on the southwesternmost coast of Florida would be in the pre-dawn hours tomorrow, and then spreading northward through the day on Tuesday to north of Tampa, and then the most likely, if it's still a tropical storm after that, shown as you see there, Wednesday into Thursday. Storm surge, we'll start with the watch warning. Check the box that I didn't read it, and there's a graphic that shows that anywhere from south of Cape Coral to just to the east of Apalachicola, there is a storm surge watch out on the odd chance that it might intensify more than what we're showing here. The peak surges that we're expecting on this, I hit the wrong button. Here we go, peak surge, there we go. 1 to 2 feet in the Florida Keys, 1 to 3 feet in the southwest coast of Florida, 2 to 4 feet from a large area from east of Apalachicola down to Bonito Beach. And with that values, you're going to get some inundation, especially along the beaches themselves, and some beach erosion and some rip current issues are the main thing I would suspect we're going to see from these values as they are forecast. There probably are some low-lying roads, and if they're in the area that might get impassable if this actually verifies as the peak surge when that comes up. Probably the most likely occurrence of adverse conditions in Elsa's trek will be the potential for heavy rainfall, whereas the more serious is going on down in the Caribbean right now, with the storm moving up the west coast and the predominant bands of heavy weather off to the east of the center. This looks like a very reasonable forecast of widespread 2 to 4 inches with pockets of 4 to 6 inches possible on the coast there. Nothing they can't handle. They get that kind of rain and big thunderstorms sometimes, frequently throughout the summer period. So most areas are not going to see a serious risk of that, but in the event they get all of that happen at once to somewhere, there is at least a slight risk for flash flooding along into the east of the path of where the storm takes us. So get rid of the share here if I can. Let's see. There we are. That's basically what I have. So the basic story is it's a fast enough moving storm that an extreme rain event is not anticipated. There might be some small chances in Florida of some storm surge issues along the beaches. The main impacts will be heavy rain, mudslides in Cuba, and the lingering heavy rains that might occur from the tail of the storm hanging down all the way into the Caymans and maybe even Jamaica, with the northward trek of the tropical storm. At that point, Alex, I'm open to any questions or discussion from you or Hal or anyone in the audience.
Hal, you got some questions? Let's pop them up.
Yeah, great perspective, Bill. I appreciated what you shared about the slight change in landfall location. A slight change in the track being a great difference in the landfall location, I guess, because of the angle of the storm kind of going up the west coast of Florida.
Yeah, and while it may not make much of a difference in a weak storm like Elsa, it sure made a difference in 2004 with Hurricane Charlie. A lot of people say it made a sharp sudden turn. It only made a slight deviation in the track, maybe 15 degrees off the forecast angle of approach, but because it was parallel to the coast, instead of Tampa getting hit, it was down in the Punta Gorda area where Charlie hit. And a strong, small hurricane like that, it makes all the difference in the world between almost no weather and devastation.
I had one more question for you, Bill. It sounded like, from what I read in the National Hurricane Center discussion this morning, that the wind field is relatively small with Elsa. How could that affect the redevelopment coming off of Cuba because of the smaller than average wind field?
Yeah, I would. It looks like that. Two things. You would think it would fall apart even more so, but it seems to have a reasonably decent mid-level circulation, so that may compensate for that and build back down. But the other thing, being small, the core of the storm, if it follows that exact track, will be to the west of the more higher terrain and mountainous areas of Cuba, and a flatter part of the country will be traversed as it crosses. I forgot to mention that also, with the northward motion and the outflow I was showing, I would expect if it held together, the wind field might expand some.
Thanks, Bill.
What are we thinking about when we're looking at the terrain going over Cuba today? Is that going to have a major impact or just not much of an impact at all?
Well, neither the guidance or the hurricane specialists seem to think it will have that much of a disruptive effect on the storm. They tend to be more disruptive the stronger the storm is, the more it knocks it apart. It takes, the weaker part of the storm, you would intuitively think, yeah, it would wipe it out, but there's not much there to begin with. And with the upper level forcing being quite good, that would explain why it's most likely going to hold together.
Yesterday, I know we were discussing the great presentation on the satellite image, but yet when the hurricane hunters were in there, we found something different. That kind of points out some things to us.
Yeah, yesterday I was surprised because it was circular. There was several convective bands in all quadrants. So I thought they were going to find a better defined tropical storm in there, not a hurricane. The satellite presentation wasn't that good, but today it's if it was just the first time you saw that, you'd probably be debating whether it was a tropical storm or a depression, being elongated north-south with most of the convection off to the east.
I know the question begs, out there with the news, with the folks out there in Florida with that building collapse, what are your thoughts about impacts?
Well, they demolished the building, so that's not the main problem they'll have in their ongoing efforts to hopefully find survivors is squally weather and rain bands starting later today and continuing through at least tomorrow.
Hal?
Yeah, really interesting to see this storm. Again, we're still in the beginning half of the year. Something that stood out to me from the storm surge perspective with this storm, like Bill mentioned, a slight difference in the track could mean a very difference in landfall. Also, a slight difference with the track could mean a tremendous difference in storm surge as well. I mean, this is not a powerful hurricane or anything like that, but nonetheless, it's approaching an area of the coast that's very prone to storm surge, that area north of Tampa by Cedar Key, Appalachia Bay, places like St. Mark's, it's a concave shaped bay, very shallow, very prone to storm surge. So if this does track a little farther on the western part of the guidance, I think we could get a strong enough wind field over Appalachia Bay that I wouldn't be surprised to see maybe the storm surge values increase to maybe 3 to 6 feet if it took a farther west track.
Interesting. Yeah, that would be quite surprising. I think that peak surge that traffic is derived from the 10% exceedance data. So it would really be an outlier if it got much higher than that. But again, it's the weaker storms are the ones where we have the most error in forecasting them. So you kind of have to keep that in the back of your mind when you're.
That's right. And, a storm like this, I just thought, if it really, say, makes landfall near Sarasota or Tampa compared to out by St. Mark's or Apalachicola, I think we'd see a pretty big difference in surge, I think, with obviously a more minimal surge if it made landfall by Tampa or Sarasota. In fact, if that were to happen, I think we could actually see more of a negative surge in places like Tampa Bay because the winds would be building from east to west north of the center of circulation. So that's what I think shocked a lot of people in Hurricane Irma, that, people were surprised to see a negative storm surge in Tampa Bay, and actually a lot of the water pushed out. The surge does come around the backside when it wraps around, but not that efficiently. So.
Yeah, I remember that. Somebody showed, I forgot now who, somebody showed me a very nice presentation with just very small changes, everything else being the same, small changes in the track of Irma and how different the surge would have been.
Right. Had it just stayed offshore a little bit farther, in the Gulf, it really could have changed things. So that will be interesting with this. It does look like some of the models have shifted a little bit west, like the Euro and things like that. So if we, get a tropical storm force wind field in Appalachia Bay, I think we may see, it's possible, I think, that surge values could go up a little bit more than they've been forecasted.
Yeah.
What are we thinking about rainfall rates here? And I know we're going to get inland into Florida, but we're going up into the Carolinas as well, into Georgia.
Well, the moisture is so content in the tropical sounding, and the dynamics of how that works in the convection is the more or less instantaneous rainfall rates can easily exceed 4 inches an hour. So the trick is it going to train echo over a spot, or is the storm going to slow down and stall so that those kind of rain rates get parked over the same place for a long period of time? Right now, that's not the expectation. It's supposed to be steadily moving South Florida, then accelerating from there on out.
One thing I noticed also as we saw this storm initially get itself started is that it was moving at a pretty good rate. We're talking 29, 30 miles an hour. That's unusual for a storm like this, do you not think?
It's unusual. What's unusual is that it strengthened to a hurricane while screaming along like that.
Exactly.
Western tropical Atlantic into the Eastern Caribbean. That's usually a non-starter when the systems are moving that fast. There's the impact of shear and ingestion of dry air tends to really hurt them, getting the nice vertical stacking enough to get a hurricane strength out of it. But it nailed Barbados pretty hard.
It did. Hal, do you know any records or anything at another storm that was going this fast that actually intensified into a hurricane? Have you ever seen anything?
I can't remember. I was surprised to see this, fast forward speed and it intensifying, because sometimes we think that's going to work against itself to kind of create its own wind shear, so to speak. And in this case, it was impressive to see it still intensify. That made me think probably the conditions other than the forward speed were probably very conducive for development with the, in the environment around, as far as being in a moist environment and having warm sea surface temperatures.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking. I think it had to be really, really good. The conditions had to be really, really good for this thing not to outrun itself at 30 miles an hour.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah, well, if you go back and look at the advisories on Hurricane Emily, it was moving at in excess of 20 miles an hour across much of the Caribbean and jacked itself up to a major hurricane. So it's not impossible. And you're right; other things have to be looked at. And again, when it was upgraded to a hurricane, the radar presentation was pretty darn good. The outflow looked very good. So I think the moisture fields were excellent, and the shear was compensated for by those other factors.
Exactly. Anything else we've got going, guys? What do you think we're looking at here in the next couple of weeks? Seems like it's kind of quiet out there.
Yeah, maybe we'll actually have July-type hurricane or tropics weather for a change for the rest of the month. Who knows? At least for the next 5 days, it looks pretty quiet.
It does. It does. All right. Well, I guess that's pretty much what we've got set up for today. That's a really good little update for what we're seeing with this storm system as it comes out across Cuba, and that's if it survives and gets going into the Gulf. Everything pretty well focusing in on the Florida Panhandle. Bill Reed, Hal Needham, thank you so much this morning for providing us your expertise in giving us an update.
Well, thanks, Alex, for giving us the opportunity.
Thanks, guys. I hope everyone has a great Monday.
All right. Talk to you guys later then. Thanks.
All righty. Talk to you Wednesday.
Yeah, exactly. Okay.